Okay, I'm speaking with Karen Mock about the state of multiculturalism. Karen has been the head of the Human Rights League for B'nai B'rith. She's been the head of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, among other things, and been writing and thinking about multiculturalism for a long time. So, Karen, the policy is close to 48 years old now. What do you feel the state of multiculturalism today in Canada?
Well, I guess the good news is that because of our policy of multiculturalism that was declared in 71,
right,
and then enshrined in the Act in 88, we have been ranked, I think, first in the world for quality of life, and we're well known for our human rights and social justice initiatives. People all over the world think of Canada as a place to live. The bad news is...
Right, I was wondering when you were going to get to that part.
Well, I'm an optimist. I could not be in the field for these same 48 years if I weren't an optimist.
Right.
But since the creation of the policy, multiculturalism has been a political football. And now, with the rise of white supremacy, the rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism for sure, and anti-immigration thinking, sure again, people drag out the notion that multiculturalism is to blame. Most of the people who say that have no idea what the policy actually says and what it's all about. What multicultural policy does is enshrine in law Canadian values of human rights, social justice, equality, equity now is included, the anti-racism work, the anti-oppression work, and it's not at all about let's let everybody do their own thing regardless of what the Canadian law or values say. It's about how do we help people have the skills and the knowledge and the abilities that they need to integrate fully into Canadian society and have access to everything that they should as Canadian citizens, full and equal access.
So you're saying it's more about integration, whereas I think a lot of the criticism is that it's not about integration, it's encouraging people to remain separate and live their ways apart from each other.
Well, that's what people say, but in fact it is all about integration. So for example, when you talk about what is the state of multiculturalism now, there's been funding cut back over the years in areas like English second language. Back in the day when the policy was first created and the departments were created, and we know that education, for example, is not a federal issue, but because of that policy, the federal government was able to support programs like English as a second language and French as a second language, or heritage languages. The idea of that was that, now here's where my training as an educational psychologist comes in. Every child needs to have a positive sense of identity and self-esteem in order to learn and in order to be the best they can be. And you don't do that by trying to take their culture and their identity away from them. You do that by respecting it, by engaging. People need their grandparents, they need to be able to communicate with them. That's why people succeed in life.
So politically you now have a party, and it may not be the first time, but Max Bernier's People's Party is calling for the abolition of the policy. I think in the early days of the Reform Party, they might have called for the same thing. Why do you think that's happening, and how do you counter that?
It's happening because people who seek power have learned, and I hate to make these analogies, but we know that it was Goebbels who taught the world that if you repeat the lies often enough, people will believe them. And so, in a time usually of declining economy or when people are feeling insecure, they look for people to blame for their problems. Well, who to blame except minorities? And we've always said that's when anti-Semitism will rise. Jews have sadly been the traditional scapegoat when people try to gain power, or immigrants. And we've noticed, by the way, when I used to gather the data in some of my former positions that you mentioned, we actually had the Canadian Economic Council, the Economic Council of Canada, correlate the data on anti-Semitic incidents and hate crime with interest rates. And there was the exact correlation that as interest rates increased, as the economy was more difficult for people, that is when the incidence of hate crime and anti-Semitic incidents increased. So the scapegoating of minorities, the anti-immigration sentiment, looking for people to blame for their problems so they can feel better about themselves, and defining multiculturalism however they want in order to make people think that people are taking their jobs, or they're wanting to impose their own laws from their own cultures. And that is absolutely not what multiculturalism is about.
What's your response then to the... So I guess that's part of your response to the naysayers today is that they're attacking something that isn't what the policy is?
That's right. If they say, well, it's because of multiculturalism, people in this country need to obey our laws. Multiculturalism is also in the context of a bilingual framework for this country. So multiculturalism supports the laws and the values and our culture. It does not undermine it in any way. And when people say things like, oh, those immigrants, if they want things to, they should go back where they came from. Well, it's really such an undermining of what Canadian values are. I remember one day, years ago, I was driving the car, I almost went off the road when I heard a woman on the radio say, you know, when hatred starts, it starts with me today. When I see all these immigrants coming in and wanting things to be like it was in their countries, she said, when I moved here from England, my husband wanted to go to the States, but I wanted to come to Canada where I could continue to speak my language and have my religion and have the same queen. So all these people should go back where they came from. And I'm thinking the lack of logic in that. She wanted to come here so that she could continue to have her own culture. Well, still, anyone who comes to this country must adhere to our laws, and when they become citizens, they study, they learn, and they pledge that they will in fact uphold those laws. What the white supremacists want to do, what people who try to gain power for their political party by dumping on these, I'll call it the policies of progressive democracy or liberal democracy, they dump on those policies so that they can gain their own power. And then what do? They turn around and reduce the funding, blame the immigrants, undermine their success in integration. So it's the exact opposite. So before they criticize the policy, they need to know what it says. And they need to know that in fact, it's all about strengthening Canadian identity and strengthening this country. Where would we be if it weren't for immigration in this country? Most of the people, except for Indigenous people in this land, they didn't come to this country, the early immigrants, and adopt the values and the custom and the spirituality of the people they found here. They came to make their own lives. Now we've learned from that was not the route to go, that it had to be based on mutual respect, and that everyone has equal rights under the law and the opportunity to have equal access to everything that this country has to offer.
Okay. So last question, the defenders of multiculturalism need to do a better job in explaining what it is?
Yes, I believe that. I remember when I was asked by Jerry Weiner to chair the Canadian Multicultural Advisory Committee. He wanted to make sure that he had people with expertise, and so he created a committee people from the police, from the medical field, from education, people from right across the country who are already making an impact in integration and cultural integration and working in the field of multiculturalism. And one of the first things that we did was suggest that there be a pamphlet out called Defining Multiculturalism and helping people understand what the policy was really all about so that they wouldn't be duped by those who were trying to, dare I say, cleanse the country of people who didn't look like them or believe in the same religion.
Yeah, interesting. So much of political dialogue comes down to communications and miscommunications.
Some of which, sadly, is deliberate.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Karen. Great to chat with you about the state of multiculturalism today.
Thank you.